The story of the United States of America begins long before its name was spoken, long before the first European ships carved their wakes across the Atlantic, and long before the maps of a new world were drawn by curious hands in distant kingdoms. It begins with the lands themselves, stretching from the icy ridges of the northern forests to the warm shores of the southern coasts, and with the peoples who lived upon them for thousands of years. Their villages stood beside rivers that bent like silver threads across vast plains. Their stories rose from fires at night, blending memory and tradition across generations. The first peoples of the continent were not one nation but many nations, each with its own identity, its own leaders, its own ways of surviving and thriving across a land that demanded strength, knowledge, and adaptation. The Iroquois, the Navajo, the Cherokee, the Sioux, the Apache, and many more lived in worlds built with belief, respect for the earth, and a deep understanding of the environment that shaped them. Centuries would pass before distant events on another continent began to shift the future of these lands. The political tensions of Europe, the ambitions of monarchs, and the hunger for wealth and influence all collided with growing curiosity about what lay beyond the horizon. Sailors and merchants returned from voyages with chests filled with spices and stories of unknown shores. Kingdoms sought trade routes to Asia and means to expand their power. Explorers became instruments of royal ambition. And through this complex tangle of incentives and accidents, the first European explorers arrived upon the shores of North America. Their arrival would set into motion a chain of events that would reshape the land forever. As European ships approached the coastline in the early 17th century, the native nations observed them with caution and curiosity. Some saw opportunity in trade, believing that cooperation could bring new tools and materials. Others felt the tremors of danger in the presence of strangers who did not yet understand the rhythms of the land or the people who had cared for it for generations. In this early era, individuals like Powhatan, the powerful leader of the Algonquian-speaking peoples of the Chesapeake region, found themselves making decisions that would affect not only their own communities but the generations yet to come. Across the ocean, King James of England was determined to expand his nation's influence. The Virginia Company received his blessing to establish a settlement in the New World, and in 1607 a group of settlers created Jamestown, the first permanent English colony in North America. These colonists arrived with high expectations but little understanding of the land they stepped onto. Disease, hunger, and conflict quickly consumed them. Many would have died if not for the intervention of native people who offered food, guidance, and uneasy cooperation. The early colonial years were marked by fragile relationships. On one side were the colonists, driven by survival, profit, and the hope of building a new life. On the other were the native nations, striving to protect their homelands, maintain their traditions, and navigate the unpredictable behaviors of newcomers who operated under unfamiliar customs. As more European ships arrived, bringing more settlers, more goods, and more ambitions, the balance of power began to shift. Colonies expanded along the eastern coast, carving farmland from forests and establishing towns that would soon grow into cities. Meanwhile, far to the north, French explorers journeyed down rivers and across lakes, establishing their presence in the region that would become Canada and the Great Lakes area. They formed alliances with native nations through trade, particularly in furs, and established a network of forts and settlements that extended deep into the interior. To the south, Spanish explorers traveled through lands that would become Florida, Texas, and the Southwest, building missions and claiming territory under the Crown of Spain. These varied colonial presences created overlapping layers of cultural, political, and economic influence, each shaping the foundation upon which a future nation would be built. Over the next century, life in the colonies evolved. Families grew, towns developed, and trade routes flourished. A new identity began to emerge among the colonists. Though they were English subjects, they were shaped by the hardships and opportunities of a new land. Figures like Benjamin Franklin, who would one day become central to the nation's early identity, grew up in environments where self-reliance, innovation, and community cooperation were essential. These qualities would come to define the energy and character of the future nation. As the colonies expanded, tensions grew between settlers and native nations. Land disputes escalated into conflicts, often fueled by misunderstandings and the relentless pressure of colonial expansion. Leaders like Metacom, known to the English as King Philip, attempted to resist this encroachment. His efforts ended in a devastating war that would reshape the landscape of New England and mark one of the first major turning points in the relationship between. As the 18th century progressed, the relationship between the colonies and Great Britain grew increasingly strained. What had started as minor complaints slowly evolved into widespread frustration. Many colonists began to feel that decisions affecting their lives were being made by people who had never set foot on American soil. They watched British officials enforce taxes without asking the colonies for their consent. They saw soldiers stationed in their towns to enforce laws that most of them had never agreed to. These developments created a growing sense of separation between the colonies and the mother country. Figures like Samuel Adams expressed their anger in meetings and taverns where colonists debated the future. Benjamin Franklin, who had spent years in London as a representative for Pennsylvania, attempted to persuade British officials to listen to colonial concerns. But he returned to America realizing that his efforts had failed. Men like Franklin now felt that the colonies would never receive fair treatment under the existing system. Meanwhile, Thomas Jefferson, a young Virginia lawyer with a talent for clear and persuasive writing, began to form ideas about the natural rights of individuals. Across the colonies, printers, merchants, farmers, and craftsmen all found themselves caught in a rising tide of discontent. Moments of defiance became sparks that ignited the larger fire of revolution. When British ships arrived in Boston Harbor carrying taxed tea, locals refused to unload it. A group of colonists, disguised to obscure their identities, boarded the ships and threw the tea into the water. The event shocked the British government. To British leaders, this was open rebellion. To the colonists, it was a statement that they would no longer accept laws imposed without representation. The British Parliament responded with harsh measures designed to punish Boston and bring the colonies back under firm control. Instead, these actions only deepened the sense of injustice. In 1774, representatives from across the colonies gathered in Philadelphia to discuss their response. This gathering became known as the Continental Congress. Leaders like George Washington, John Adams, Patrick Henry, and others met face to face, many for the first time. Washington, a tall, reserved Virginian with military experience from earlier frontier wars, impressed many with his quiet sense of duty and integrity. Adams, sharp-minded and relentless in debate, argued that the colonies needed to stand united. Patrick Henry electrified listeners with bold declarations about liberty and resistance. As tension escalated, events pushed the colonies to the brink of war. In April of 1775, British troops marched from Boston to seize colonial weapons in the towns of Lexington and Concord. Local militia, ordinary farmers and craftsmen armed with muskets, confronted them. No one knows who fired the first shot, but the exchange marked the beginning of armed conflict. News spread rapidly through the colonies. Americans who had hoped for a peaceful solution now faced the reality of war. The Continental Congress reconvened and created the Continental Army to defend the colonies. They chose George Washington as its commander. Washington accepted with humility, aware of the enormity of the task. He traveled north to take command of troops who were ill-trained, poorly supplied, and uncertain about the future. Despite these challenges, Washington brought discipline and unity to the growing forces. Meanwhile, debate in the Congress intensified. Many still hoped for reconciliation, but voices like John Adams and others argued that independence was now necessary. Thomas Jefferson, known for his eloquent writing, was chosen to draft a statement explaining why the colonies had no choice but to separate from Britain. With quiet determination, Jefferson wrote through long days, crafting a document that would define the birth of a new nation. Benjamin Franklin and John Adams helped refine the final text, ensuring its message was clear and powerful. On July 4, 1776, the representatives of the colonies approved the Declaration of Independence. In it, they declared that all people possess certain rights and that governments exist to protect those rights. When governments fail in this duty, the people have the right to change or replace them. By signing the document, the representatives knowingly placed their lives at risk. They understood that the British Crown would consider them traitors. The war that followed was long and grueling. Washington's army faced devastating winters, shortages of supplies, and repeated defeats. Yet Washington's resolve never wavered. He guided his army through moments of desperation, relying on determination and the belief that their cause was just. At Valley Forge, soldiers endured harsh cold and hunger, but Washington walked among them, sharing their hardship and inspiring loyalty. Help eventually came from abroad. Benjamin Franklin, serving as an American representative in France, persuaded the French government to support the American cause. This alliance changed the course of the war. With French naval power and military assistance, the colonies gained the strength they needed to challenge British dominance. In 1781, combined American and French forces surrounded the British Army at Yorktown. After weeks of siege, the British commander surrendered. This victory effectively ended major fighting. In the years that followed, representatives of the former colonies gathered to transform 13 separate states into a unified nation. They attempted at first to operate under a set of laws known as the Articles of Confederation, but these proved too weak. The states needed a stronger central government to manage trade, security, and national issues. Leaders such as James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and George Washington met in Philadelphia to create a new framework. Over long months of debate, they crafted the Constitution of the United States. This document established 3 branches of government and created a system of checks and balances to prevent abuses of power. It was a bold experiment, combining ideas from ancient republics with Enlightenment principles and practical experience. When the states approved it, the new nation officially began. In 1789, George Washington became the first president. He approached the role with the same sense of duty he had carried throughout the war. During his presidency, he worked to strengthen the government, maintain stability, and keep the country out of foreign conflicts. Leaders like Thomas Jefferson, now serving as Secretary of State, and Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury, shaped the nation's early policies. Their differing visions, Hamilton's strong central government and Jefferson's focus on individual liberty and agricultural life, would influence political debates for generations. In the following years, the nation expanded. Settlers moved westward, crossing mountains and rivers in search of new opportunities. Explorers like Lewis and Clark, commissioned by President Jefferson after the Louisiana Purchase, traveled deep into the West to map the land and build relationships with native nations. Their journey revealed the vastness of the continent and increased America's appetite for expansion, but this growth created new challenges, especially as settlers moved into territories already inhabited by native peoples. Conflicts spread. Leaders like Tecumseh, a Shawnee chief, tried to unite native nations to defend their lands. Despite courage and dedication, native resistance faced overwhelming pressure as American settlers, armies, and government policies pushed westward. This chapter of American history remains marked by displacement, broken promises, and the profound loss of native homelands. As the 19th century unfolded, new issues emerged that threatened the unity of the nation. None was more divisive than the question of slavery. The northern states, where industrial life grew, increasingly opposed slavery. The southern states, whose economies relied on enslaved labor, defended it fiercely. Heated debates raged in Congress and across the nation, involving figures like Henry Clay, John C. Calhoun, and Daniel Webster, each fighting for their vision of America's future. The nation moved into the 20th century with a bold confidence, shaped by rapid industrial capability and an ever-growing population that believed the future was theirs to build. Yet beneath this confidence were deep societal tensions, questions of labor, immigration, and identity that would influence every major decision. American cities expanded dramatically. Immigrants from Europe, Asia, and other regions crossed oceans hoping to find new life, and their arrival created neighborhoods bursting with energy and conflict. Factories roared day and night, and the skyline of cities rose upward in steel and ambition. Americans began to move faster than ever before, assisted by new inventions like the airplane, the automobile, and the telephone, each shrinking distances and altering relationships between people who once lived isolated lives. The power of the United States expanded, and the country began to look beyond its borders, shaping a larger presence on the world stage. When Europe descended into the Great War, the United States initially remained distant, observing the tragedy from across the ocean. But as the conflict intensified and American ships were attacked, the pressure became impossible to ignore. The nation entered the war reluctantly but decisively, and its participation shifted the balance. Soldiers traveled to unfamiliar lands, fighting in the mud-filled trenches, while citizens at home supported the war effort through factories, farms, and fundraising. When the fighting finally ended, the world stepped into a fragile peace, and the United States emerged with a new sense of global responsibility. Yet the return home was not easy. Soldiers came back to social changes they barely recognized, and the country faced a struggle between progress and tradition. The 1920s brought a dramatic transformation. This was a decade lit by bright city lights, jazz music, and cultural experimentation. People danced, traveled, bought new products, and enjoyed unprecedented economic growth. But beneath the glitter lay vulnerabilities. Banking systems were unstable, wealth was unevenly distributed, and speculation spiraled out of control. When the stock market crashed in 1929, it was as though the shining facade of prosperity shattered instantly. Families lost homes, farms collapsed, banks failed, and lines for food stretched through American cities. The Great Depression became a defining moment in the nation's spirit, testing endurance, compassion, and ingenuity. A new leadership emerged to confront the crisis. Sweeping reforms reshaped the government's role in the economy, offering relief to the unemployed, restructuring industries, and building infrastructure across the country. Dams, bridges, roads, and public works revived not only the economy but also hope. Americans learned to support one another in ways that built social resilience. As the nation slowly recovered, another threat appeared from across the ocean. Totalitarian regimes rose in Europe and Asia, and the world again spiraled toward global conflict. When war erupted in Europe in 1939, the United States watched, wary of repeating previous sacrifices. Yet once again, events forced the nation into the center of global crisis. The attack that drew America fully into the war created a sense of unity and urgency. People from all walks of life enlisted, worked in factories, and transformed the economy into a massive engine of production. Women stepped into roles traditionally held by men, proving indispensable in keeping the country functioning. Soldiers fought across Europe and the Pacific, enduring severe conditions and fierce battles. The conflict tested every aspect of American life, and when victory was finally achieved, the world recognized the United States as one of the leading powers shaping the new global order. The post-war years brought enormous change. Economic growth surged, cities expanded, and suburbs appeared across the landscape. Technological innovation flourished as Americans embraced televisions, automobiles, and modern appliances that redefined daily life. Yet beneath the comfort of prosperity, long-standing injustices demanded attention. The civil rights movement emerged with powerful determination, led by courageous individuals who refused to accept the inequality embedded in society. Marches, speeches, protests, and acts of quiet bravery created a moral force that reshaped the nation. The push for equality expanded across racial lines, gender struggles, and new social movements that challenged every assumption about identity and fairness. Simultaneously, the world outside remained tense. The ideological standoff between two superpowers influenced foreign policy, technological development, and cultural expression. The fear of nuclear conflict shaped generations. Competitions in science and space exploration became symbolic battles, driving innovation that would later transform communication, computing, and global connectivity. Americans watched astronauts step onto the moon, witnessing a moment that redefined the human sense of possibility. Domestic life remained complex. Political disagreements deepened as the nation faced controversies, wars abroad, economic shifts, and social transformations. The struggle for equality continued. Environmental concerns grew, inspiring conservation movements and new laws protecting the land and water. Technology moved rapidly, creating new industries and altering the workforce. The Cold War eventually ended, but new challenges replaced old ones. Terrorism, cyber threats, economic changes, and global competition shaped a new era. As the 21st century progressed, the United States found itself navigating unprecedented change. Digital technology revolutionized communication, transforming everything from business to culture. People connected across vast distances, shared ideas instantly, and participated in global conversations that shaped politics, entertainment, and identity. But the digital age brought new complexities: privacy concerns, misinformation, economic disruption, and cultural divisions that tested national unity. Economic booms and recessions continued to appear in cycles. Social movements reawakened, pushing for justice in policing, gender equality, and the rights of marginalized communities. Debates about health, immigration, and national identity intensified, demonstrating that the United States, like every nation, continually evolves through struggle, hope, disagreement, and determination. Throughout all of these transformations, the country remained defined by its extraordinary diversity. People from every background, speaking many languages and holding countless traditions, contributed to the nation's culture, technology, art, and science. America's identity became a living story, a mosaic of dreams, failures, triumphs, and reinventions, always shaped by the belief that a better tomorrow can be built through courage and collaboration. The nation continued to push boundaries in innovation, exploring renewable energy, artificial intelligence, space travel, and advanced medicine. Universities, laboratories, and entrepreneurs fostered ideas that influenced the world. Yet even as progress accelerated, Americans confronted the challenges of political polarization and social division, recognizing that unity remained essential for facing global issues like climate change and economic inequality. As the story of the United States moved toward the present, the enduring theme remained the same as it had been since the earliest settlements: a relentless pursuit of possibility. The nation's history was not a straight line of success, but a dramatic journey filled with conflict, transformation, and renewal. Every era left its mark, shaping the collective memory and guiding the ideas that defined the future. In the end, the history of the United States became a testament to human complexity. It revealed how individuals, communities, leaders, and movements shaped a land that constantly redefined itself. From its earliest native civilizations to waves of immigrants, from revolution to global leadership, from internal struggle to remarkable